June 2020. The world was on hold. A virus had driven humanity indoors, into fear, into isolation. But for some, the wilderness became the only escape. For Sandra Hughes, it was a homecoming. She was 54 years old, an expert in survival, a woman who knew the language of the forest better than the language of the city. She packed her silver Saab, drove into the Sierra National Forest, and vanished. Deputies found her car, wrecked. They found her campsite, ransacked. They found her birth certificate, her social security card, her very identity, scattered like trash on the forest floor. 3 years later, a wildfire swept through the search area, burning the clues to ash. Then, a toddler claimed he saw her ghost in a meadow. This is not just a lost person case. This is a riddle with no body, no killer, and no motive. This is the mystery of Sandra Hughes. To understand the end, we have to look at the beginning. Sandra Lynn Johnson Hughes was not a damsel in distress long before she ever stepped foot in California. By 2020, she had lived several lives.
Born in 1966, Sandra was a nomad at heart. She had been married twice, and while neither marriage produced children, they also never tethered her down. She moved where the wind took her. Most recently, she had been living in the volcanic isolation of Hawaii. But in early 2020, she packed up her life and drove to the mainland, settling in the small town of Coarsegold, California, a gateway to the sprawling 1.3 million acre Sierra National Forest. This wasn't a vacation for her. This was a return to her roots. In college, Sandra had trained to be a park ranger. She wasn't just a hiker. She was what law enforcement would later call a survivalist. She knew how to read the stars, how to filter water, how to face down the cold without a whimper. By June of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was ripping through the world. For Sandra, the solution was simple: leave the chaos behind. On June 26th, she called her family. She told them she was heading into the woods, a solo camping trip. She needed space. She needed peace. It was the last time anyone would ever hear her voice.
For the next 4 days, silence. No calls, no texts. But her family wasn't worried yet. This was Sandy. She was more at home under a tarp than under a roof. They assumed her phone had died, or she was simply enjoying the solitude. But on July 1, the silence turned into a scream. Hikers stumbled upon a scene of pure chaos near Johnson Meadows, above Bass Lake. A campsite, but it looked like a tornado had hit it. A sleeping bag lay abandoned, gear was strewn across the dirt. And then, investigators found the folder. Inside that purple folder, a birth certificate, a social security card, legal documents, the entire paper trail of Sandra Hughes' life, left to rot in the wilderness. This was the first red flag. If you are a survivalist, your social security card stays in the glove box. It does not end up on the forest floor unless something went terribly, horribly wrong. Deputies called Sandra's niece, Ashley Mackis. The family's blood ran cold. They knew the camping style of their aunt. She was meticulous. She was tidy. A messy campsite wasn't just unusual, it was a violation of her very nature. Something had happened here. Something violent? Something panicked? On July 4th, 2020, Independence Day, the mystery took a turn down a dirt road it couldn't come back from. Deputies found Sandra's vehicle, a silver Saab. It was located near the Chiquito Creek trailhead, crumpled against a tree, resting in a gully. The damage was minor. Investigators estimated the car had been moving at less than 20 miles per hour when it hit the tree. Low speed. No blood at the scene, no broken glass indicating a massive impact.
But here is where the story fractures into the illogical. Witnesses were at the crash site. Real people, real witnesses. They saw Sandra standing near the wrecked Saab. She was alive. They offered to help. They had cell service. They could call a tow truck. They could call an ambulance. She declined. According to Sheriff Tyson Pogue, Sandra seemed detached. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't grateful. She just refused. She lingered by the car for a while, and then she did something inexplicable. She walked away, into the woods, barefoot. Think about that for a second. A survivalist, 54 years old. She knows that the Sierra Nevada can swing from 80 degrees during the day to near freezing at night. She knows the risks of predators, of dehydration, of the jagged granite that laces the trails. And yet, she walked away from her car, away from her supplies, away from her shoes.
In the days that followed, the sightings continued. On July 4th, the same day as the crash, hikers reported seeing a woman matching Sandra's description walking down the road. She had a bruise on her face, perhaps from the airbag, perhaps from the impact. But again, when they asked if she needed help, she brushed them off. Then, a more disturbing sighting. Weeks later, in early August, 2 hunters were deep in the woods near Chiquito Creek. They saw a woman leaning against a tree. She looked thin, thinner than normal. She looked weathered. But when they tried to approach, she didn't wave. She didn't call out. She just watched them in silence. Later, when they got back to town and saw the missing person posters, they were certain it was Sandra. So, between July 4 and early August, Sandra Hughes was alive. She was surviving. But she was surviving badly. Without a car, without a campsite, moving like a ghost through the trees. The question haunting the Madera County Sheriff's Office was, why? Was it a head injury? A low-speed crash can still cause traumatic brain injury. A contusion that leads to confusion, paranoia, and irrational behavior. Was she suffering from sunset delirium? A common symptom of wilderness exhaustion? Or was it psychological? Sheriff Pogue used the word despondent. Did Sandra Hughes go into the woods not to find herself, but to lose herself? Then, just when search and rescue teams were mobilizing, nature itself conspired to bury the truth. September 2020. The heat was unbearable. The drought had turned the Sierra Nevada into a tinderbox. And then, the spark came. The Creek Fire. It was one of the largest wildfires in California history. It burned for months. It consumed hundreds of thousands of acres. And crucially, it incinerated the exact area where Sandra Hughes had vanished. The search had been massive. Dogs, horses, helicopters, ground teams from half a dozen sheriff departments. But the fire didn't just delay the search. It transformed the landscape. For a while, investigators tried to stay optimistic. Maybe the fire would burn away the dense underbrush, revealing the clues they had missed. Maybe a bone or a piece of fabric would be exposed in the ash. But it didn't happen. The fire erased the crime scene. Any trace evidence, footprints, fibers, the potential location of a grave, was superheated to nothingness. By the time the smoke cleared, the search had shifted from rescue to recovery. And by December, even the recovery efforts felt hopeless. Law enforcement officially classified the case as open but cold. 2 years passed, then 3. But the case refused to die, because the internet never forgets. And apparently, neither do the dead. By 2023, the Madera County Sheriff's Office had only 2 unsolved missing person cases on its books. Sandra Hughes was one of them. As the years went by, the theories got stranger, and the leads got weirder.
First, the medium. A paranormal investigation group contacted the police. They claimed they had a psychic medium on their team who had a vision of Sandra Hughes, dead, buried in a shallow grave in a specific remote section of the forest. Because the case was so cold, because they had nothing else to go on, the sheriff's office actually went out there. They searched the GPS coordinates given by the medium. They found nothing, just dirt and trees. But the most haunting tip didn't come from a psychic. It came from a toddler. In July 2021, a family named the Gorbas was driving through the mountains near Shut-Eye Peak. They stopped for a picnic lunch. The parents, Jake and Victoria, were setting out the food when their 3-year-old son, Caden, started staring at an empty meadow. The parents asked him what was wrong. The parents looked. There was nothing there. No woman, no body, just grass. But Caden was insistent. He described her in detail. He said she was a woman, lying face down. And he said something that made the hair on the back of his father's neck stand up. He described the woman as having blue hair. Remember, Sandra Hughes was 54. She was a survivalist. And before she left for her trip, she had dyed her naturally brown hair bright blue. The Gorbas searched the meadow. They found nothing. But they were so spooked that they called the sheriff. Deputies went out. They searched the meadow professionally. They found nothing. Was it a child's imagination? A trick of the light? Or did a 3-year-old, perhaps more sensitive to the veil between life and death than the rest of us, actually see Sandra Hughes? Still lost? Still lying in that cold meadow? Waiting to be found? So what happened to Sandra Hughes? We are left with a collage of contradictions. The evidence. The campsite. Chaos. But a chaos that could have been caused by an animal, a fall, or a psychological break. The crash. Minor. Non-fatal. But perhaps enough to cause a brain injury that turned a survivalist into a wanderer. The sightings. She was alive for weeks. Walking. Barefoot. Silent. Refusing help. The theories. Theory 1. The accident. Sandra crashed her car, suffered a concussion, traumatic brain injury. The TBI destroyed her executive function. She became paranoid, believing the searchers were threats. She walked deeper into the woods to hide and eventually succumbed to exposure. Her body is buried under the regrowth or was incinerated in the creek fire. Theory 2. The voluntary disappearance. She was despondent. The pandemic, potential financial stress, or personal demons drove her to walk away from her life deliberately. She destroyed her ID to make identification impossible and started a new life off the grid. However, the lack of sightings since 2020 makes this unlikely for a 54-year-old woman with limited resources. Theory 3. Foul play. Someone else was in those woods. A stranger, a predator. They ransacked her camp, stole her car, leading to the crash, and when she tried to escape, they caught her. But if that were the case, why did witnesses see her after the crash? Why was she alone by the Saab? Today, the case remains open. The Madera County Sheriff's Office asks that if you are hiking in the Sierra National Forest or the border of Yosemite and you find something, a piece of clothing, a bone, a blue strand of hair, Do not touch it. Drop a pin on your GPS. Call them. Sandra Hughes wanted to be alone. She wanted silence. In the end, the forest granted her wish with a cruelty that borders on the absolute. She is still out there, walking barefoot through the pines, leaning against a tree, or maybe, just maybe, lying face down in a meadow, waiting for a little boy to point the way home.